of dropping a huge terror funding case. And now, of course, this all started back in 2014. You apparently were involved in triggering a federal investigation into Islamic Relief, which is one of the world's largest charities. So this criminal case was presented by 3 government agencies, is what you're reporting. But the Obama administration, their Justice Department, declined to prosecute. So now you're calling on Congress to investigate this. And why now?
Right. Well, I had to wait before speaking out about this until there was some type of public confirmation of an ongoing investigation, because I knew that Islamic Relief was under investigation, but I didn't want to jeopardize the operation I was a part of. But we filed Freedom of Information Act requests with the Middle East Forum about the investigation that I was a part of into Islamic Relief. And the response back from one of the agencies essentially said they're still under investigation, so we can't release any of these records to you. And so they confirmed that there's an ongoing investigation, at which point the cat was out of the bag and I felt free to talk about my story. And I've wanted to talk about it for a long time because it was just truly shocking. We believe that this would likely have been the largest terrorism-related finance prosecution in American history, but the Obama administration's Justice Department chose not to prosecute based on the criminal case by 3 government agencies.
Okay, so the Islamic Relief on its face looks like a decent organization. I looked at their website. According to the website, they say that they're helping people all around the world, people that are experiencing disasters, poverty, what have you. And so you're making the case that not all the funding that they get, federal funding as well, is going to good causes. You're saying that, in fact, you believe some of this money is going to fund terror groups like Hamas and other extremist groups. So how exactly did you connect these dots?
So when you just go over the publicly available information, you'll find that the founders and the leaders of Islamic Relief, which is based in Britain, openly said they had ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. They denied being a Muslim Brotherhood operation, but it was known that they followed the Muslim Brotherhood ideology and had all of these ties. I started looking at the personnel for the American branch and other branches around the world to see what type of people were running their organization. And you found just tons of links to either directly the Muslim Brotherhood or other organizations that were very apparently fronts for the Muslim Brotherhood and groups like them. And so it was from that open source information that I researched and also brought in research from other writers who had written about Islamic Relief previously that I put together this report, and I briefed an agency in 2014, and they found it to be compelling enough to move forward. The agent that I specifically talked to, he just couldn't believe what I was telling him. He was amazed by it because as I was going through the different layers of the radical Islamic network in the United States and around the world, which included prominent organizations like the Council on American Islamic Relations, he basically said that he and no one that he worked with had ever been briefed on this overall network before. And he understood the magnitude of it. I provided information on 8 other organizations as a result of this, but Islamic Relief was the focus, and so it moved forward from there. The Israeli government, by the way, has openly said that Islamic Relief sends millions of dollars to Hamas. They issue grants to organizations that don't go by the name of Hamas but are obviously linked to Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And the United Arab Emirates has also banned Islamic Relief for being a terrorist entity. So the evidence is very strong. Other governments have taken action. And you can tell if you research the group and you look at who they're linked to, that there is a lot of genuine humanitarian aid going there. I don't believe that everyone who donates to Islamic Relief or is involved with Islamic Relief is a bad actor or is an extremist. But there are enough extremist ties there, and apparently the agencies basically said to me, where there's smoke, there's fire. And so they found something that they felt was worth a prosecution.
And Ryan, you mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood. The State Department doesn't list that as a terror group. So if you could explain, your findings on this and like why you're linking this to terrorism.
Right. So we know that the Muslim Brotherhood, which gave birth to various jihadist terrorist groups, is, everyone agrees, an extremist organization, but where the debate happens is, are they a terrorist organization? I would point people to the founding charter of Hamas, which is designated as a terrorist group, because in its founding charter, it identifies itself as the wing of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. So Hamas, by its own declarations, is not just linked to the Brotherhood, it's the same thing. And in the United States, the largest terrorism financing trial in American history of the Holy Land Foundation, we know from that trial that Holy Land Foundation was directly a Muslim Brotherhood front financing Hamas. So we know that the Brotherhood, including within the United States, is financing terror, and Islamic Relief, according to the research that I did, is part of that overall infrastructure.
Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong. I do believe that the Trump administration was looking into the Muslim Brotherhood, and there was some sort of discussion whether they were going to put them on the terror group list. And there was some discussion that they were going to maybe put some chapters of it, if you will, in this list, but not deem the whole Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group.
Right. So the Trump administration has designated some affiliates of the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist groups where it is so blatant that they're engaging in violence that it's a solid case. But when groups like the Muslim Brotherhood try to hide it a little bit by forming front after front for money transfers, so they always have a little bit of distance, that's where it becomes more difficult. And one of the great disappointments I've had with the Trump administration is that, contrary to what we expected, they have not designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist organization. That means Muslim Brotherhood can legally operate within the United States. So that big gap in our policy still exists. And that's partially probably due to the influence of Qatar and Turkey, two supposed allies of ours that sponsor the Muslim Brotherhood and essentially make the Brotherhood act as their proxy.
And really quickly, this is all still under investigation right now, and some members of Congress are concerned. In fact, I believe 7 of them wrote letters to the directors of the FBI and IRS to find out more information. So where are we at right now?
Well, now we're at the point of congressional pressure. So you have 7 members of Congress who have written letters to the FBI, the IRS, and the Office of Personnel Management, the 3 agencies that were involved in putting together this criminal case, to find out what's going on. But their main concern as members of Congress, because they're not prosecutors, is about the taxpayer money that goes to Islamic Relief. They've gotten over $700,000 in American taxpayer money and tens of millions of dollars from other governments in the West who have given grants to Islamic Relief. So it's really outrageous. Islamic Relief is also part of a system where approved list of charity, federal government or federal employees can donate to those charities out of their paychecks. And Islamic Relief is one of those that's approved for that. That was scrutinized as part of my investigation with the government agencies, but they're still there. And so members of Congress are now trying to find out what happened here, why was the case dropped, but most importantly, they want to be briefed on information linking Islamic Relief to any type of criminal or extremist activity since it's taxpayer funded.
And Ryan, really quickly on your research, you said that you were provided information by the Israeli government. Is that what you said?
Well, the Israeli government has openly accused Islamic Relief. So my information did not come from Israel, but the fact that Israel openly accuses Islamic Relief obviously is part of the case. And the Muslim country of the United Arab Emirates has also made that argument against Islamic Relief.
Yeah, and obviously Israel is an ally, but some would say that maybe this research or their information was politically motivated. What would you say to that?
My response is that what was politically motivated was probably dropping the case. The agents were convinced that this was a solid prosecution, that this was a big deal, worth investing their time in putting together the case and then moving forward. And so they were stunned when the Obama administration's Justice Department, without any real explanation, declined to prosecute. And so they wouldn't say directly what they thought it was, but it was speculated that this had to do with the fact that Islamic Relief has strong political ties to both political parties, that they're a massive organization, and it's intimidating for any politician or even anyone in the federal government to take on Islamic Relief and then be tarred as an Islamophobe for the rest of your life.
Why would the Obama administration's Justice Department decline to prosecute? Like, what motive? And also, was there any sort of explanation given as to why?
There was no explanation for why the criminal case was dropped, why the Obama Justice Department chose not to prosecute. They continued the investigation, so they didn't shut that down, but they declined to prosecute. And the fact that there was such a silence about why this case was not pursued is really what infuriated the agents and left them puzzled and just speculating as to what type of reasoning could go behind this. I believe it's because, just like with other powerful radical Islamic organizations, they are politically a powerhouse. If you take on Islamic Relief, you're taking on all of their branches across the world, an organization that has gotten like $156 million in revenue in 1 year just by one branch. And so you're taking on not a tiny organization, not a tiny front for Hamas. Look at the chaos and the political controversy surrounding the prosecution of the Holy Land Foundation, which was successful and even had events with a band that was pro-Hamas. The case was solid against the Holy Land Foundation, and there was still all this outcry, accusing the U.S. government of waging a war on Islam and persecuting innocent Muslims. Now multiply that by tenfold, and that's what you would have gotten with Islamic Relief. So I can understand the aversion to taking on the case and dealing with those negative consequences on the part of the federal government. Even if I don't agree with it, I understand why they would look at this and say this is politically very intimidating.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on something, which was the Holy Land Foundation, and I think 5 people were convicted. I mean, this actually happened. It's not fake news. And people were skeptical when the Holy Land Foundation was being investigated. As you said, that people were being called anti-Muslim for looking into it. And so this is kind of a dangerous place politically for some people to even ask questions. But if you could remind us exactly what the Holy Land Foundation, like how much money they were taking in and how they got to the bottom of that investigation.
Right, so the Holy Land Foundation sent at least $10 million to Hamas, probably much more because you only show in court what you can really definitely prove. The number's probably much higher. But the Holy Land Foundation was directly set up by the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. There weren't degrees of separation. The Brotherhood literally had operatives in the United States setting up Holy Land Foundation in Texas, and they financed Hamas. And this was kind of known for years and years, but then eventually a case was put forward under the Bush administration, and they were successfully prosecuted for it, and it was the largest terrorism financing trial in American history. And lots of other groups were labeled as unindicted co-conspirators as part of that and were linked to Holy Land Foundation. So you had every group connected to the Muslim Brotherhood and that radical Islamic infrastructure acting in unison to frame that trial as being an act of anti-Muslim persecution, as proof that there's a war on Islam happening. Islamic Relief would be a much bigger case than the Holy Land Foundation, and it would probably, if it was successfully prosecuted, lead to investigations and prosecutions of many other organizations. It could form the basis for going after a global infrastructure as well as an infrastructure in the United States. So the consequences of this from a national security perspective could have been very, very positive and very dramatic. From a political perspective, they would have been very negative. It would have been a big headache with lots of risks and potentially tarred reputations unfairly because people get called Islamophobes just for criticizing some of these groups, much less prosecuting them.
Ryan, what would you like to see happen next? What would be the next steps for the members of Congress? Obviously, the investigation's ongoing, so where do we go from here?
Well, I obviously want Congress to be fully aware of the ties between extremism and terrorism and Islamic Relief. Because this is a taxpayer-funded entity, they deserve to know about that. My hope is that taxpayer money would be permanently cut off from the United States, as well as any other country in the West or around the world that we can pressure that provides them with that type of funding. And hopefully another humanitarian organization can rise up and replace the group so that there's somewhere else where these donations can go, and those that rely upon those donations aren't hurt by it. But I would hope for that. I would hope that Islamic Relief would not get this privileged position so that federal employees are essentially encouraged to donate to them. And whether it leads to a prosecution or not, I just want the evidence to be followed, regardless of political consequences. If the evidence is there, prosecute. If the case is weak, then don't prosecute. But regardless of what that issue is, It's another issue in regards to the taxpayer money and the federal government, especially the State Department and the U.S. Agency of International